Man, we're here with Brad. Hey guys, if you're listening to the podcast, if they're hearing this, they're obviously listening to the podcast, right? Right? If you're enjoying this podcast or you just want to support the podcast, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, turn on the notifications. Thank you for the support. This podcast is brought to you by our friend and realtor, Naomi Townsend with Keller Williams Property Teams. She'll help you in every step of the way, whether you're buying or selling a home, commercial property, mobile home, or even a vacant lot. In the last few years, she's helped hundreds of families buy their dream homes in the Central Valley, Bay Area, Monterey, and even the Sacramento area. Check her Zillow profile where she has a perfect 5-star ranking. She is also bilingual in Spanish. In 2021, she was in the national top 2 in her brokerage. Please, guys, check out her Instagram, Sold by Naomi, or reach out to her at 408-623-1414. All the links are in the bio. Remember, guys, support those who support us. This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Sorensen's Ace Hardware, located at 402 Washington Avenue in Los Banos, proudly serving the community since 1947. Please check out our friend at Sorensen's for all your hardware needs. Come on, guys, support those who support us. Thanks, Sorensen's. Sorensen's also has a Modesto location located at 1433 Coffee Road. Modesto, true value for all your hardware needs. For all of our people out in the Modesto area, please support those who support us. Thank you.
You gotta get uncomfortable to get comfort.
There's some help. It ain't on the way. It's already waiting for you.
This little pill right here could take over your life. And I found that out the hard way. Mission statement of this podcast: highlight stories of people that I've met in my journey in recovery. Man, Brad, first of all, thank you for being willing to sit down and do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And so, man, I know Brad. Brad was there to be a positive influence in my life, like when I needed it the most, right? When he was one of the ones that like pushed me off to rehab. Like, this is a good idea, kid. You need to go get your life together, right? And I've gotten to know Brad pretty well over the last 7 years, especially over the last 2 years. We took a lot of road trips together, and I think Brad is just an exceptional person, man. Like, just watching the way you've raised your daughter by yourself and some of the things that you've tackled, knowing your story and what you've been through and where you're at right now is pretty phenomenal, right? And when we talked about doing this, you were like, "Oh, I don't have anything to share," and I'm like, "No, you got a lot to share. You've been through a lot, and you've done a lot, and you've accomplished a lot, right?" So, since we started this thing, I was like, "Man, we got to get Brad on here." So I'm glad we finally got the opportunity to do so. So,
cool. Thanks,
what's
man.
going on, Brad?
Not much. Just working a lot and taking care of my little girl and just living life. Living, enjoying life without the use of drugs, as we like to say.
Right.
What I thought it would look like at this point, back then is a lot different, but that's okay.
Yeah. So what's your clean date, Brad?
July 12th, 2002.
So 2002, so that's 21 years.
Almost, yeah.
Almost.
Next month will be 21 years.
Nice. Yeah. So, like, what does that mean to you?
It means a lot, There's a rebirth, looking back at this point, it means, damn, I'm getting old. So I got clean when I was 30, right. And I got a belly button birthday around the corner for my clean date. So, yeah, it's bittersweet. It's like, yeah, I got another year clean, but now I'm getting old. But, yeah, it means a lot. I remember the last time I used, and I wasn't having a good time, and I was going to go to a meeting right off the bat after, and I decided to just give it a day and clean up first. So that's the day I woke up clean, from midnight, the beginning of July 12th, I was clean.
Nice. And so, like, you're not originally from California. You're our local Florida man.
Yes.
Right? And so, like, what did life look like for Brad, like, as far as you want to go back, right?
Yeah. I grew up in Florida. I grew up in South Florida for the first 15 years of my life. I was fortunate enough to have, a really good family. I got to experience a lot of things that, I wish I could provide my daughter, was able to provide my daughter, just we grew up on the water, you know, fishing, snorkeling, diving, you name it, just living the Florida life. We had, our parents had a condo down in the Keys, and that was our home away from home. That was our playground. Plus we lived in South Florida, right on the water too there. So, and things weren't perfect. My dad was one of us. He was an alcoholic, but he was more of a functioning alcoholic. And over the years, it wasn't really one of those come home violent, beating everybody up kind of, alcoholic, but, I've seen him tie one on here and there over the years, but, it was just one of those everyday things. Anytime we went out on the boat, anytime we went in the car, we always had beer, I always had a cooler full of beer,
Yeah.
and Pepsis. And if you weren't old enough to drink the Pepsis, you drank the beer, and and I just remember growing up, I wanted to be a part of that,
Right.
It's like, can I have a beer? He's like, how old are you? I was like, 7. He's like, no, not till you're 8. So I couldn't wait to turn 8 years old so I can have a beer,
Yeah, yeah.
And I was 8. I'm 8. But how old are you? 8. I'm 8. Now I can have a beer, right? No, not till you're 9. So finally around the age of 11 or so, I decided to just start taking it.
Right.
It was the first time I really tied one on myself, and, got drunk for my first time, and, all my friends in the neighborhood were older. My siblings were older, so I felt like I was behind. I had a lot of catching up to do, and I wanted to be a part of that. And so, when I finally did partake, and I wasn't one of those that, I just had to do it every day after that, It's like, yeah, that was fun, maybe a few weeks, few months, whatever, I'd do it again, and then it came to be like a little more frequent on the weekends, and then over the years, started introducing different substances, started smoking weed when I was like 13. And, again, it wasn't like an everyday thing.
Right.
It was just something we did on occasion. So a lot of people say, you're born an addict, or, I don't know if I was one of those that was really born an addict, I also suffered from some mental health issues with depression, anxiety. As a kid, I never, I don't know if it had to do with just being the youngest around and not feeling a part of, or just something I was born with, something that was passed down. But, my mom took me to a psychologist, and off and on over the years, and, I never wanted to go. She'd take me kicking and screaming sometimes, and like I didn't want to go to school. She'd take me kicking and screaming to school, because I felt like I just wasn't a part of it. I didn't fit in. I didn't belong. All my friends were older, and I'd go to school. I feel like I was around a bunch of little kids, and I was already doing grown-up stuff and learning grown-up things, and so I just never felt a part of growing up in school. And it wasn't until like middle school when I started getting loaded, I finally started feeling a part of, not necessarily with my schoolmates, but the kids in my neighborhood, and the older siblings, and all that, and it just kind of progressed from there. It's like my story didn't start off just running, straight for the hardest thing I can find, and as often as I could. That came later in life.
When I could relate on like so many different levels, right? Like
Yeah.
the normalcy of drinking at an early age, right? Like this is just what people do,
Yeah.
right? And also, the feeling of like not feeling like you belong, right? Like I was around a lot of older people growing up, and I gravitated towards that. So like I could relate to like what you just said, like it feels like it's my story,
Yeah.
right? And in normalizing stuff, it was funny because I was talking to a friend, and he was like, the stuff that we normalized at such a young age is like insane, especially when you start raising kids and you look back on and you think about what you were doing. Like, no, that's not acceptable behavior, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so like, you had like an ideal upbringing. Like a lot of people would be like, he was born in a beautiful place and this and that. Like, how could you, right? Like, how do things start to progress to the point where stuff's unmanageable?
Like I said, that didn't come later in high school. Is when around 16 or so, is when I started smoking weed every day. Maybe 16, 17, towards my last year or two of high school. I ended up getting expelled from high school. Just excessive absences, tardies, skipping, whatnot,
Yeah,
nothing
new
too.
set of priorities, it sounds like.
Yeah, and it's, I started surfing, and a lot of times most of the time I'd skip school just to go surfing, and yeah, I remember this one teacher pulled me out of class one time. He's like, I understand you got in trouble for skipping school. Why'd you get suspended for skipping school? What was so important that you had to skip? I'm like, oh, it was the best swell we had of the year. It's like, and he was an old surfer. He's like, oh, where'd you surf at? And we ended up talking about surfing the whole time. He's like, oh, okay, that's understandable. You skipped to go surf. So I thought it was okay, But, after high school, my mom said, either you just move out and get a job, and or maybe you can go to art school, So you like to draw and stuff. So I was like, oh, art school, huh? Yeah, I'm gonna give that a try. So, I floundered around in art school for a while. And, just like drugs progress, and, I was doing a lot of psychedelics, and, and I'd tried other drugs here and there, I'm gonna do a whole drug-a-log, but, I remember back in the early 80s, I watched a friend of mine's brother started getting into smoking cocaine, freebasing. Back then it wasn't even called crack, it was BC before crack, and, we each gave him $5. He gave us a tiny little sliver, just enough to get us kind of a little bit of energy. And it's like, all right, now I'll drink your beers and smoke your weed and calm down, so you don't get too hooked on this stuff like I am. I was like, okay. And then, then I start watching his TV disappear, his VCR disappear, riding around on his scooter to all the pawn shops trying to find his stuff. So I saw what that drug did, early on, and for the most part, I kind of steered clear. But every once in a while, you run into people that are doing it, and it's like, hey, we're doing this right now. Sure, I'll try it, But it didn't really grab a hold of me,
Right.
back then. That didn't come until I was in my mid-20s. After college, I had some traumatic experience happen while I was in college. My father committed suicide. I came home from work on a lunch break when I was about 19 years old and found him myself. Found him in the garage, and that was probably the single most traumatic experience I ever had in my life. And it didn't send me off to the races right away, but slowly through, just some shifts in behavior and attitude, and I slowly started using a little more and a little more. It wasn't until long after, until I was in my mid-20s, I'd had to leave college. I switched my major around a couple times. I was in one relationship after another. Most of my girlfriends were younger than me, and it just snowballed to the point to where, I couldn't finish college. And I had to do with financials and everything. My dad died, and some financial stuff happened, and my financial aid, changed, and so I had to take a break, and I thought I'd go back. Once I turned 24, gained what they call student independence. By the time I turned 24, I was just started partying too much.
So would you say like finding your father became the onset of the depression phase in your life, and then drugs became the solution to that? Was that kind of?
It slowly started escalating, probably. In the beginning, it was just this constant rewind, replay going on in my head, and just to shut it all down, I just smoked weed constantly, all the time. From the minute I got up to the minute I went to bed. But I didn't really, drink my sorrows away. I wasn't a big drinker. But it wasn't, after a while, I just became more angry, more irritable, with those closest to me. And then eventually snowballed into me picking up, a bad habit, smoking cocaine, smoking crack. And I had done it before. I'd done it several times since then, on occasion, but for some reason it just grabbed a hold of me and wouldn't let go at that point. I was delivering pizza. In the hood was our home base, and we didn't have to have the signs on our car, and we're just driving, people are flagging me down all day because they see a white guy driving around in the hood, And it was just a matter of time where it's like, I'd done this shit before. Yeah, why not? Here, what will it hurt? And then it just picked up from there. And I got to where I just couldn't stop doing it.
Well, and through this process, right, where you're picking up a new habit, at any one time did you stop and think maybe I got a problem here, or is it just all gas and no brakes?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was like, okay, that sucked. I spent more than I planned to. I stayed up longer than I intended to. I had to lie about where I was at, where my money went. As long as I just stick to, just smoking weed, maybe having a few beers, I'll be okay. And I lived in that denial for a long time. But as things escalated, and I reached a point to where I said I need help. And I literally, told my mom, I told him myself. I said, something's wrong with me. I got a drug problem and I need help. I literally came to her like in tears, and I had a sister of mine who was at the time working in the recovery field, and she helped me to get into a program.
So what did that look like the first time?
That was it was just a 7-day detox.
Right.
And then from there, they evaluate you for a program. And in Florida, where I lived, it wasn't like this plethora of recovery options like there is out here, like especially today. And there, you really had to fight to stay in. And they wanted to send you to an outpatient program. And as far as I was concerned, because I had all the answers,
right,
that wasn't going to work for me. I needed to go away somewhere besides where I lived. I needed to go to another town and stay there for a while, And after the 7 days, they said, well, if you're not physically dependent on a substance like alcohol or opioids, then all we have for you is outpatient. So I just went home, and I stayed clean for about 30 days, and maybe went to a meeting or two, didn't ask for help, and picked right back up where I left off. And I repeated that process over and over again about every year. I'd have enough and, finally get myself into another program. And, this time I finally, the next time around, about a year later, I finally got into a 28-day program. And, but it was and I went in on insurance that time through my work, and I had to pay for a lot of it. Actually, my mom had to put up some money for me to get in there. But it was an everyday battle with the insurance company. Yeah, every other day they're trying to kick me out of there. It's like, oh wait, no, your insurance is going to pay for you to stay. No, pack your bags, you got to leave. Insurance is kicking you out. So by the time I got out of there, it was like, they reckoned me going to a halfway house, and I was in a really expensive town. I was in West Palm Beach. It was expensive to live there. It's like, I can't afford any of these halfway houses here. I don't make that much money. And I guess here they call them SLEs, or sober living environment. Back then we call them halfway houses.
Yeah, everything's a little more delicate now.
Yeah, and then they said, oh well, your insurance might pay for you to stay there. I'm like, I'm not playing this game for oh, you got a home, now you don't have a home. Yeah, you got a home, you don't have a, So I split, went back home.
So how many treatment facilities did you go to, Brad, before this thing finally stuck for you?
Well, about a year later, I went through a 30-day program. Stayed clean for about 90 days for that one. I was actually court ordered to that one, and over the years I was in and out of jail. Never spent more than a day in jail, but I went a bunch of times, usually for misdemeanor stuff. But I went once for a day to try to save a job. I ended up getting, leaving there. So they told me my work wasn't going to pay for it, and they were going to charge me like $1,000 a day to be in there. And I said, oh, no thanks. So I split. And this, when I finally got clean, I had ran the gamut of, trying to get into another program. And this time I was convinced that I had a lot more going on than just drugs. I was going to check myself into a dual diagnosis program for people suffering from mental illness and drug addiction. And that was like a year-long program. And you had to do all of your own evals, and because there's no medical staff on, which was odd to me. There's no medical staff on site, but yet it's for dual diagnosis, people with mentally ill people. I still couldn't figure that one out. But, you had to do all your own evals and everything to get in there. And I jumped through all the hoops, and I was waiting for a bed date, finally got my bed date, and I got arrested. So, and that was one of the conditions, is you couldn't be on paper. So I said, well, what do I do now? And I learned through the years of going through treatment, and, the seed was planted, I knew the solution.
Right.
Go to meetings, do 90 meetings in 90 days, avoid all playmates and playgrounds, get phone numbers, use them, get a sponsor, work the steps, and I just started going to meetings.
So I'm assuming that like all these things were introduced to you through those years of going in and out of treatment facilities and getting locked up, and like, what was the pivot point for you? Like, what made it click to where it was like, okay, I'm really gonna do this thing?
I just had enough, and I didn't know going forward that was gonna be it for me. It wasn't like this magic light bulb went off and I just said, well, this is gonna be different now. I'm just gonna do it. And, I actually went through, because I was, at the time I was working as a truck driver over the road. So I was just going to meetings on the weekends, and I was staying out for a week at a time. And so some weekends I made it to a meeting. Some weekends I got loaded. And that, and I finally just one day I went to a meeting, and, I had a friend of mine who I'd reconnected with out on the road that I grew up with, in Florida. We were hanging out together for a little while. He'd been in a treatment a couple times, so he kind of knew the deal, and he got clean just before me, and he gave me this speaker tape, and he kept hounding me. He's like, "Did you listen to that tape yet?" I'm like, "No, I got it in my truck. I had nothing better to do, drive around all week, Finally I got around to listening to it, and I just kept listening to it, and I just, obsessed on just listening to the speaker tape over and over again. And then once I got into the rooms, and started going to meetings and got a sponsor and started taking some suggestions. My sponsor gave me a whole shoebox full of speaker tapes for me to record. So I made all my own copies. So I was just driving around all week listening to speaker tapes and going to meetings on the weekend.
Who was that speaker? Do you remember what speaker tape it was?
Earl Hightower.
Earl Hightower.
Yeah. He's, as he says, famous in an anonymous program. He was an AA speaker. And a friend of mine had actually attended that convention in Atlanta and met him, and just got like a whole bunch of copies of his tape and just started giving it out to all his friends that he knew probably needed recovery, me being one of them. And I was probably one of the only ones that actually stayed clean.
So that speaker tape may have saved your life.
It could have, because I didn't have a cell phone back then. All I had was like a calling card, So when I actually got around to getting a sponsor, I would call my sponsor long distance on the calling card, and stay in these shady hotels. We didn't have a lot of money. We had a small budget for hotels. It wasn't a sleeper cab type driving job, and so yeah.
So I got to imagine, like, you're out here on the road, the disease is all around you, and you're staying clean.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'm back living in my hometown out on the beach on Anna Maria Island, Florida. Where I, did most of my growing up through my formative years, my teens and 20s, partying, and kind of where it all started for me. And, I'd moved around a little before then, and definitely since then. But, yeah, and I got clean, and I ended up doing a meeting out on the beach. And I ended up becoming my home group, and I actually started chairing that meeting. And it's a spot where I used to like stop and use on the way to work or on the way home from a run or something, And I'm like chairing a meeting there.
So like, what does early recovery look like for Brad?
In the beginning, it was just weekends. I got a sponsor, and he highly suggested I get off the road so I can do a 90 and 90. And at that point, I had about 90 days. So I got off the road, got a local job. I started going to meetings every day, and I went to a meeting every day for almost a year after that. Got involved in service, or off the bat, at that home group I was doing on the beach, there was no coffee to make, no chairs to set up, no, I just showed up and said I was a home group member at first, and he said, why don't you try doing the Saturday night meeting too? This guy needs help setting up. So I started setting up for the Saturday night meeting, and kind of joined 2 home groups for a while until they made me the GSR of that beach meeting, and the girls that were doing that meeting ended up, taking off and leaving me with the meeting. So I ran that meeting by myself for like a year and a half, my first year of recovery. And, going to the area service meetings, representing my group, and just being a service and the fellowship. And, that made me feel not just a participant, but a part of something bigger than myself, and that's where, recovery really started to affect my spirit. It wasn't just me staying clean for myself. It was, serving a greater purpose. I was actually able to, in early recovery, start carrying the torch and giving back to others, and being there for others, and people thanking me for being there to, because sometimes I was the only one there, and someone would just wander up looking for a meeting, and I'd show up regardless. If there's nobody there, I'd sit there and do my step work, until somebody showed up. So early recovery, hanging out with people that were working the program of recovery and staying clean. And, where I got clean, people did stuff after the meetings. We got to dinner, we got to coffee, we'd go to the movies, we'd go to a comedy show, we'd go bowling, go shoot pool. We'd go together as a group. In the beginning I tried, going to a meeting and then hanging out with my old friends, watch them get high in front of me, and pretend like it didn't bother me. Going to bars and just hang out and shoot pool with, by myself with all the same place I used to use at, and, to the point to where they were even saying, "What are you doing here, man? I thought you were doing this recovery thing. You shouldn't be here." I was like, "Yeah, you're probably right."
Yeah.
You got a point there. And then I started trying to drag the people from the meetings to my hangouts. They're like, "No, dude, I used to use there. We're going here tonight. Why don't you come with us?" And it took a while, because I'm not the most outgoing person in the world and shy around new people, and but it took a while of just showing up and participating, and them asking me repetitively, after every meeting, "Yeah, we're going to go here and hang out." I just eventually ran out of excuses, and just started hanging out.
Well, and that's what like people like us, and like when I said I can identify with you at the beginning when we were talking about like you just never feel like you belong, right? And then we find the drugs, and then the drugs make us feel okay, right? And then once we get clean, finding a place where you feel okay, right? Where you feel important, right? You're being of service, you're welcomed. Like, can you explain like what that means to a person that felt like they never fit in?
Yeah, I was reading, we hang out, in our literature. I was reading the meditation today, and it talked about like changing motives. Right. And in the beginning, what motivated us to get clean, stay clean, maybe even be of service, might be a little different over the years. Always checking our motives behind why we do things. And sometimes it's selfishly motivated. Yeah, I wanted to stay clean, and they said this is what I'm supposed to do. If I want to maintain my recovery. And then it was, hey, people starting to, treat me like I belong here, like I'm important, some perceived importance or whatever, it's like, I'm a GSR, look at my recovery,
Yeah.
But, that kind of wears off after a while, and it runs its course. And when you really start, sometimes, in certain areas, service positions are hard to fill, and then you get well, if I don't do it, nobody else will, and then that perceived importance, or, and and sometimes if you stop doing it, somebody else will step up.
Right.
And sometimes the meeting will fall. But, and it's like, I had to learn a balance. At first, I didn't have kids. I didn't even have a relationship or a girlfriend at the time. I was staying with my mom's. I didn't have a whole lot of responsibility. So anything recovery related, I was there. I was to all the picnics, all the get-togethers, the barbecues, the this, the that, everything. And but the newcomer, and the person just walking in the door like I did, and being there for that person, and being there to bring that person to a meeting, being there to bring that person to an event and to a convention, and being that person where I was, say, hey, why don't you come hang out with us after the meeting? It's like, oh no, I got stuff to do. It's like, I get that, but can it wait an hour? Just come hang out with us for a little bit. Being that guy that's kind of giving that person a little nudge into, living and enjoying life without the use of drugs and getting out of their head for a little bit, And that's where it really started changing, my motives and being of service is just being there for that new guy.
So, and then early in your recovery, you had a daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, how does that change things, right? Like, I don't know how much you want to get into that, if you want to get into that at all.
Oh, I can. Yeah. I don't know where we're at on time, but it seems like anytime I share my story, the majority of it's spent just getting to recovery, and then, then been clean for 20 years and all this other shit happened. Went through a whole lot more probably clean than I did using,
Well, let's get into it.
But I met my daughter's mom. That's why I ended up out here in California. She's from California. She grew up in Santa Cruz. She was pregnant when we met, and of course, we started hanging out, and she had her baby, and instant family plan. It started off with me taking her to meetings, and she lived right down the street from me, so it was, then we started hanging out, and next thing you know, we got together, and I ended up helping her raise her daughter, raised her as my own, first 2-3 years. 2 years into that, we had a daughter of our own, and that's my daughter I have now and that I've had since. And oh gosh, we had moved to South Carolina, so they moved to Florida from out here, and then we all moved to South Carolina, and that's where my daughter was born. And she was one of us. We met in the rooms, and she just had trouble staying clean and sticking to the program. She'd relapsed a little here and a little there, but jumped right back into the program, the whole time we were together. But yeah, it got to a point to where, we just had to go our separate ways. And, my daughter was like 6 months old at the time, and her daughter was like 2.5 or 1.5. And it was a really, really tough time. We had bought a house, and in a prime school district, and I thought I was living the dream there for a second, and I had a good job, and we had a house, and we had kids, and we got a dog, and had everything with a white picket fence, and it didn't work out. And without getting too much into, she ended up passing away. So, I don't like to speak ill of, her, in that regard. But, we had our moments. We went back and forth for a little while. She still had her daughter. We were never married, so I had no legal rights to her daughter whatsoever. And, and she did not give me any hassles about custody or anything like that with my daughter. She let me have my daughter. She took her daughter, said, we made an agreement. Me and my family will raise my daughter. You and your family can raise your daughter, and we kind of agreed to do that. And, went our separate ways. I ended up moving back down to Florida, and she ended up, dying of an overdose eventually. And, I tried to hang in there. I had my daughter living in Florida with my mom and brother for about 6 months, and I was trying to be there for the other girl. I knew mine was being taken care of, and it was the toughest thing I ever had to do, moving back to Florida, and I was like leaving this one behind to go take care of the other one. And that was probably, one of the hardest parts of my recovery right there.
And how do you stay clean during that whole process?
Yeah, I stayed connected. I kept going to meetings. I had a sponsor, I still had a lot of speaker tapes. you know, and I, you know, we're talking here about, you know, God of our understanding or higher power, you know. Now learn how to deepen that relationship and rely on that power to get me through a lot of it. You know, a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation, and, you know, a lot of help from others. And, you know, moving forward, you know, she had eventually, you know, she stayed with her grandparents for a while, and then, you know, the housing market crashed. I was staying with my mom. My mom was dying of COPD, and she ended up passing away. You know, and towards the end, I was taking care of my mom when she was dying, and you know, and that happened within like a year apart from each other. And at the same time, I started going back to school full time and working full time. Now I'm raising a toddler on my own, you know, and that was a tough deal. And they were trying to get me to move back up to South Carolina. I had already started going to school. Housing market crash. I was kind of stuck in my condo I was in because it wasn't worth anything, and I wasn't making any money. I couldn't afford to move, you know, and
And
they
you stayed
eventually,
clean.
yeah, and I stayed clean through all of that, you know, and it's like that's why I say I don't have this perfect story of like, you know, I got clean, I went back to school, I met, you know, I got this, you know, perfect wife and this perfect life and then, you know, a nice house and cars and this career, and, you know, I've gone back to school, I got my bachelor's degree. I got kicked out of high school. You know, I'd made the president's list, like straight A's my first year or two, and back to college, which impressed the hell out of me. I don't know about anyone else. But, you know, I made it through school and I got my degree, you know, and ended up making money a fraction of what I'm used to, driving a truck and not enough to even live on. But I got the piece of paper that said I did it, you know, and, you know, I'd worked in that field for a little while and struggled my ass off. And that's what I did before I moved out here.
Well,
know?
what I hear, you know, and you say, oh, I don't have this impressive, but I hear a whole list of things that people would use as their primary reservation and just a reason to get loaded. And you walk through not
Yeah.
only one of them, but handfuls of these things, and
Yeah.
you stayed clean, right? And
Yeah.
and we often talk about, like I often talk about it in my private life, in meetings, on here. Like the toughest thing that I've done is raise kids,
Yeah.
right? And I got a partner,
Yeah.
right? So I watch you balance all this stuff, raise a daughter, and a good daughter,
Yeah.
right? Like a good kid. And so I think that's more impressive than any monetary thing that
Exactly.
anybody can have,
Yeah.
right? I think it's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah, that's what I said in the beginning. I said where I thought I'd be at this point, you know, was, you know, I was thinking in terms of monetary, you
Right.
know. I had all these monetary illusions of where I would be in 20 years if I quit using, you know.
Shit, I should have a Lambo by now. I'm about to celebrate 7 years clean. You know, like, but
Yeah.
that's the perspective shift, right? I think that's the miracle, right? Is our priorities get set in line for us,
Yeah.
right? I think they say like, hey, if you want to make God laugh, make plans, right?
Yeah.
One of those types of things. You know,
Yeah.
like, do you ever stop and give yourself credit for all this stuff that you've done?
Occasionally. You know, and that's what a sponsor's for. You know,
Right.
he reminds me all the time that I'm doing better than I give myself credit for. You know, because I'm my own worst critic. You know, and that single parent syndrome of not being enough. You know, goes along with, you know, the disease of addiction always telling us that we're not enough.
Right.
You know, and I think just as single parents, you know, addicts or not, you know, we all go through that of, you know, trying to fulfill both roles, and we always feel like we're not doing enough and falling short. So yeah, I got to remind myself that I'm doing a lot better than I think I am sometimes, because I forget.
Right.
I get too caught up in the moment and you know, the stresses of everyday life and just getting through it. Sometimes I forget, you know, what I'm doing and how far I've gotten to get to where I'm at. You know, because I look at all the monetary stuff around me and it's like, wow, I didn't stay clean to just live in this little crappy apartment and drive this crappy old car, you know, blah, blah, blah. But then again, you know, I feel a whole lot better about my, you know, on the flip side, I feel a whole lot better about myself than I used to when I was getting loaded when I first got clean and through that whole process, you know. The rewards I get are far from monetary today, you know. They're internal.
Right.
And it comes, just an inner peace and serenity that I get through not just staying clean, but, the process of living through, the process of recovery and applying principles to my everyday life. And, that conscious contact and connection with the higher power, through prayer and meditation and we read, go to meetings and we read and write to gain clarity and understanding. And, but the rubber really meets the road applying it to your life, and I've had to, and I'm not unique. And, and my sponsor has to remind me all the time, you're not unique. you do have a very unique situation, but you're not unique. There's other people who have, done what you've done and probably had it a lot worse and probably done a lot, and I'm just another actor on the bus, and we all got our own stuff and struggles and things we contend with, and some things are harder for other people to deal with than others, and some things are easier for other people to deal with than others, but the rubber meets the road when we actually apply these principles to our lives, through thick and thin, regardless of what we're going through, and that simple concept of just one day at a time, one moment at a time, one problem at a time, one situation at a time, It just, it sounds cliche. I couldn't stand the bumper stickers when I first got here, But, this too shall pass, TOO. It took me a while to understand what that meant, I just, when things feel too overwhelming, it does in that moment, but give it time. Apply some principles to it.
Right.
Try to stay out of the way. Try not to make it worse, by your reaction, by your attitude, And those are the things that I was taught here, and sponsorship is key. So I say it all the time, man, it's hard to spot self-deception by yourself, because if I just try to do this thing on my own, it might have some value, but doing it, together with others, is where it's at, because, I can sit in self, and rationalize a lot of stuff, but that's harder to get away with doing that around others.
Yeah. Well, I think I hear you say it more than I hear most people say, like it's impossible to spot self-deception by yourself, right?
Yeah.
We rely on each other, to stay clean around here, because there's been many a times where I've walked into where we hang out, like my sponsor says, with my ass in a paper bag, right? And I depend on you guys to help me attach it again, because I can talk myself into the craziest shit, right? And to where I'm just spun like a ball of yarn, and I don't know how to get untangled, and I rely on you guys, right? Not only my sponsor, but my support group, right? And I'm fortunate that you're a part of that. And I know, like you just recently went through some tough stuff too, right? Like you had a back surgery and all that stuff. And so like today, like how does that look like, man? You have a new problem, right? Like, how do you manage that on a day-to-day basis?
It's not easy. I still live with a lot of pain. Surgery didn't fix my problem. It just alleviated a life-threatening emergency, basically. I still, I struggle with weight, and since my surgery, it's been really hard to, I've been gaining weight like crazy. And not, plus I'm getting older, and the older you get, the harder it is to maintain. But, my job consumes a lot of my time and energy.
Right.
I put in a lot of hours. But I've had a few surgeries, since I've been clean, a handful of them. I had a knee surgery and all kinds of stuff. And you get through it, you go through it, and I know for a lot of people that surgery, and especially, the pain medications and all of that, is a real trigger for a lot of people. And I'm not exempt from that. I like to get high. I don't care what it is.
Right.
Yeah, you feel the effects from it, and it feels good. And you want more, and that's where that spotting self-deception by yourself thing really comes into play. I have to stick real close to the program, real close to my sponsor, real close to my support network, and not isolate when I'm going through that stuff. And that's what's gotten me through it as I continue, even I come in there, right after my surgery and, put my leg up on the chair or whatever I got to do, to get through, you know, that process. I don't want to sit at home alone and all that, you know. And I know your sponsor took me to my back surgery. I had this like medication dilemma on the where it's like I've been taking these pills and I feel like I'm immune to them. Are these any better? I don't know. Let's ask EJ.
Yeah, I know, right? And it was to the point, you know, before I got clean, like I could read any prescription. I didn't even need the bottle. All I had to do is look at the pill and I could tell you exactly what was in it, how many milligrams, right? I was like my own pharmacist. All right. But thank God, you know, I forgot. Oh, it's funny what you forget in almost 7 years, right? Like a lot of that stuff has fallen off, and God, I'm thankful for it, you know. But yeah, man, like honestly, Brad, like you give me hope, right? Like I have 2 kids, right? A teenager and a younger, and my wife works out of town, so I'm with them a lot, right? So like your story helps me, right? When I'm challenged or I'm exhausted from it, like I know somebody's done it before, right? And I know somebody's done it, and it wasn't as easy, because at the end of the night, I do have a partner, right, to lean on. And so I don't know if I've ever told you, but your story and what you do on a day-to-day basis gives me hope that I can get through it and I can do it, right? And I could show up time and time again, because I listen to you and I'm like, man, I don't know how this guy does it, right?
Yeah.
And another thing that I think is pretty awesome, and I don't know if you want to get into it too, is like that other daughter came back into your life.
Yeah. Yeah, that was not really why I moved out here, and that wasn't really expected. It's just kind of how it worked out, you know. And I know, like, you know, when we were in South Carolina, they kind of shipped her out here to live with some family in Los Banos, and, you know, and it was what it was, and it was okay, you know. And I moved out here and I tried to be part of her life, and, you know, moving out here was, you know, kind of welcomed out here with open arms, and, you know, I moved out here and it's like, what do you want? You know, it's like Twilight Zone, you know, I was like, okay, I'm here now, what now? What? But I made the best of it, and I participated as much as they'd allow me to, and you know, try to be in her life. You know, that's kind of why we moved out here.
Right.
It's because I wanted my daughter to be closer to her sister. And, you know, my mom had passed away. You know, my dad passed away a long time ago. I had my sister and, you know, that family, you know, and her kids and stuff. And I still have a brother. I had 2 brothers. Oh, God, I've left so much out. I had two brothers. They're like 10 and 11 years older than me. One of them, me and him are like best friends. And he's one of us, too. And, you know, and in the end, he eventually succumbed to, you know, he had a lot of health problems, a lot of complications. You know, it's cause of death. Undetermined, but, you know, he ended up passing away shortly after I moved out here. So it was like, you know, I kind of had to leave my own family behind. I don't have any of my own family here in California. You know, it's just all my ex's family and whatnot. And, you know, circumstances happened, you know, where I'm kind of jumping around, but where, you know, my daughter was staying, circumstances changed, you know, and that whole dynamic is where she was at with, you know, changed, you know, was it perfect? No, could have been better, maybe, you know, but it got to the point to where she was done, and she didn't want to live there anymore, and she took off, and she bounced around to different friends, and, you know, couch surfed for a while, and, you know, eventually she came and asked if she could stay with us. You know, and I tried to say, well, why don't you just go back to where, you know, why don't you just stay with them, you know, just get, you know, she came to me at like, you know, she just turned 16, you know, it's like, you only got 2 more years left, can't you just, you know, suck that buttercup and, you know, tough it up. But there was a lot more going on that I didn't know about, you know, there's just a lot going on. A lot of stuff, and, you know, definitely not getting into all that, but and it was more about her, you know, she was done, she refused. She'd rather be a homeless runaway than go back, and she's ready to bolt up to Oregon, and, you know, in a toxic situation. And I was just like, you know, I had her evaluated, you know, and I probably shouldn't get into all this, and, you know, but, you know, I found out, you know, I ended up getting guardianship of her.
So you got reunited with that girl that you left at 2.5?
The last couple of years. And,
right. So God's got a plan.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when I heard you talk about that process, I'm like, again, man, Brad's such a better person than me.
And she was, you know, and she knows it. She was a handful, man.
Right.
She wasn't raised like, you know, I raised my daughter, you know, and there was a different dynamic in the house now, and it was chaos. And I definitely felt like I bit off more than I can chew, but I got through it.
Right.
With the help of the program, and the people in it, and higher power of my understanding, and others, I had to reach out to, social services got involved, and, I had to reach, in the court system, and I got help through there, and, I got through it, and what it all boils down to, kids are only kids for a very short period of their lives, of our lives, as parents. Pretty soon they grow up, and it's all about the relationship. That's all I moved over here for. Is I wanted us to have a relationship, Now we have a relationship, She ended up having a kid of her own. Just spent Thursday with her. She's got her own place, got her own kid, and her own thing going, and she cooked us dinner for a change, and it was awesome. Things aren't perfect there either. They could be better. They could be worse. It is what it is, and she's doing a hell of a job with what she's equipped with. It's like I tried to get her on a different path, and she came to me kind of going down one path, and I tried really hard to the best of my ability to try to steer her away from that path into a better one, and she kind of ended up somewhere in between, in the middle, and that's okay. Like I said, things could be much worse, and
Well, and at the end of the day, you got to become that stabilizing force in that person's life for that small period of time because of choices you made. Again, give yourself credit, Brad.
Yeah.
Give yourself a little bit of credit, right?
I tried, man. I tried. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, man. And so, is there anything that we missed? Like, is there anything that you want to share that we might have missed?
Oh, there's probably a whole lot I left out,
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
So
it just happens when you share. You always think about it after the fact, and I'll probably watch this and be like, oh my God, I should have said this, or I shouldn't have said that, or whatever. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head.
So, say somebody's listening to this right now and they're struggling, right? And they maybe they're struggling with their addiction, right? Or, what would you tell somebody that thinks that they're a lost cause, or maybe somebody's out there that says this won't work for me?
Oh, well, if you let it. I think we get in our own way more than we realize. That whole spotting self-deception by yourself thing, that saved my ass, because I don't know where I heard it or when I heard it, but it's just one of the many things that resonated with me when I was able to open myself up and give this recovery thing a chance to work in my life, because I was very defiant. I was too cool for school. I had all the answers. You couldn't tell me nothing. I'll do some of it, but I'm going to do it my way. Y'all are not going to tell me, I just had to get out of my own way, I know I'm hard. I'm still, don't give myself enough credit. And it's like, but you're worth it, give yourself a break. You deserve a break,
Yeah, man. I appreciate you doing this, Brad. And don't give yourself a hard time. We used to ditch school to smoke weed on a canal bank, man. If I was able to surf, I probably never would have been in school. You owe me a hug.
All right.
That's it. We did it.
Yep.
Brad, thank you, man.
Yeah.